There are many formatting options in Excel, and the following sheet is an exercise. In the grey cells you'll find a series of instructions, and this typically gets you to do formatting to various data on the right. For example, in the first grey cell A3, it says apply the font Times New Roman to the range B3 to D3, so I'm going to highlight B3 to D3. The font button appears on the Home tab in the ribbon, and the font is currently set to Arial. If I hit the drop down, I'm looking for Times New Roman, and to save me scrolling, I'll press the letter T on my keyboard. From there, I'll scroll from Homer down to Times New Roman and click on Times New Roman. And I've applied the font Times New Roman to the range B3 to D3. The next instruction appears in A4 and says apply the font size 14 to B4 to D4. So I highlight B4 to D4 and I look for the font size button. The font size is currently set to 10, the larger the number, the bigger the font, and I'm going to change that to 14. The next instruction in A5 says apply bold to the range B5 to D5, so I highlight B5 to D5, and on the Home tab in the ribbon, I hit the button that has a B on it, and this makes this information bold. The next instruction in A6 says apply italics to the range B6 to D6. So I click the button with an I, and that makes italics, which is sort of a slopey type of print. The next instruction in A7 says apply underline to the range of B7 to D7. So I highlight B7 to D7, and I hit the button with a U. This underlines the three cells. Notice the underline actually has a drop down, and you can actually change to double underline if you wanted to. The next instruction in A8 is asking to left align the range B8 to D8, so I highlight B8 to D8 and I click the left align button. The next instruction is to center, so I'm going to highlight these three cells and I'm going to hit the center button on my Home tab in the ribbon. The next instruction is to right align these three cells, so I highlight these three cells and I hit the button Align Text Right. The next instruction in A11 is asking us to merge and center the text across the range B11 to D11. So highlight B11 to D11, and instead of centering within a cell, we're going to use the Merge and Center button to merge those three cells into one larger cell and center the text in that larger cell. The next instruction in A12 is asking us to apply the currency style to this range here. I highlight the range and I'm looking for this button on the Home tab in the ribbon and in the Numbers group. I can either hit the dollars button or I could hit the drop down here and choose currency. Basically I end up with a dollar sign at the beginning, a comma every thousandth, and 2 decimal places. The next instruction in A13 is to apply the percent style to this range here. I highlight the range and I have a button in my Numbers group called percent style. This multiplies by 100 and puts a percent sign on each value. The next instruction is to apply the comma style to this range here. I highlight the range and I have a button which puts a comma every thousandth and gives me 2 decimal places. The next instruction in A15 is asking us to increase the decimal places to 4. So I highlight the range and I have an increase decimal places button. I need 4 decimal places, so I click it 1, 2, 3 times, and that gives me 4 decimal places, much like exchange rates. The next instruction is asking me to decrease the decimal places to 0. So I highlight the 3 cells and I use the decrease decimal button to decrease the decimal places. I need to click it 1, 2 times to round off to 0 decimal places. The next instruction asks us to increase the indent, so I highlight the 3 cells and I use the increase indent button to just indent that text a little bit in their cells. The next instruction is asking us to decrease the indent, so I highlight the 3 cells and I use the decrease indent button on my Home tab. The next instruction in A19 is asking us to put a double bottom border on this range here. I highlight the 3 cells and I go for the Borders button which you find in the font group of your ribbon. If I hit the drop down, I get various border styles. So I am after a bottom double border, which is like what you would apply to a grand total. And I click that. It's quite hard to see unless you click away from those cells, but those cells now do have a bottom double border. The next instruction, I'd like to apply a red background to this cell. And so what we use here is this particular icon called Fill Color. If I hit the drop down, I can choose the color red. And now I have a red background. This particular cell here requires a yellow fill color. So I choose yellow. And this one requires a grey fill color. The next instruction in A21 is wanting to apply text color to these three cells. If I click the first cell, I need that text to be red. So instead of the bucket, which is fill color, I use the button to the right of that called font color. And I click the button and it goes red. If I click the next cell and hit the drop down on the font color, I can choose the color green. And if I click the next cell, I can hit the drop down and choose the font color blue. The instruction in A22 says to select the O only to the right of the 90 and apply Superscript. Superscript is when text is lifted up, like 90 degrees. I'll click on the cell and using the formula bar, I'll highlight the O only because it's only the O that I want to lift. If I then right click, I can click Format Cells with my left button. In the Format Cells dialog box, I can then tick Superscript and that will make my text nice and small and high. And I've got 90 degrees. If you wanted to practice further, click in C22 and type centimetres, cm, and a 2. I'm going to highlight just the 2, right click, left click Format Cells, and tick Superscript, and OK. And now I've got centimetres squared. The next instruction wants us to apply a 90-degree text orientation to these three cells here. So I highlight these three cells and I'm looking for this button. This button is orientation and it appears in the alignment group of the Home tab. When I click the drop down, I can actually choose Rotate Text Up, and this is 90 degrees. The next instruction in A24 wants us to wrap the text in these three cells here. The text in this cell is not being completely shown. I can tell by looking up in my formula bar. What's in that cell is sales figures for 1998, but all I can see is sales figures. If I highlight these three cells, I can wrap the text instead of making the columns really wide, and I'll use the Wrap Text button that you'll find in the alignment group. And that wraps the text and enables me to see two lines of text without having to widen the columns. The next instruction says use the Format Painter to copy the format from this cell to A3 to A25. So I click on this cell and I'm using the Format Painter, which you'll find in the clipboard group of the Home tab. When you click this button, your mouse will appear as a paintbrush, and then I drag from A3 to A25 to paint those cells. Those cells now have that format, so the Format Painter paints this format onto other cells. The instruction in A26 asks us to select the rows 3 to 28 and apply a row height of 15. So I'm going right out to the row numbers and I'm highlighting rows 3 to 28. If I then right click one of these row numbers, I'll be able to left click row height and I'll be able to set their height to exactly 15 and OK. The effect of that, of course, is the height of row 24 and 23 has been set to 15 and now I can't see all the text in these two rows. To best fit the row height, I'm going to place my mouse on the line between rows 23 and 24 and double click. I'm then going to place my mouse on the line between rows 24 and 25 and double click. And that best fits the row height so I can see all the text. The next instruction in A27 asks us to select the columns B to D and apply a column width of 20. So I'm going to take my mouse up to the column letters and highlight columns B, C and D. I'll right click one of the column letters and then left click column width. And I want to set the width of those columns to exactly 20 characters wide. The last instruction in A28 asks us to select this range here. And it asks us to apply a table style. Table styles are available on the Home tab in the Styles group by clicking the Format as Table button. When you click this button, you end up with a gallery of styles. There are light styles, medium styles, and dark styles. This is asking for a light style 11. As I rest on each light style, they have a number, and if I move along, I'll eventually find Table Style Light 11. When I click that and click OK, I've now formatted that range as a table.